This is where it begins. How do you assume the wealthy version of you, and why does this single shift have the power to transform your entire financial destiny? In this video, you will see exactly how stepping into a new identity rewires your results, reshapes your confidence, and shows you what wealthy people do differently in real life. This is how it unfolds. You will discover why your current habits, conversations, and reactions are products of who you believe you are, rather than what you desire. This is where truth breaks through. You'll see how ordinary people who change their inner identity, like the cashier who imagined herself as a business owner until it became real, activated breakthroughs that seemed impossible before the shift. This is why it matters. You'll learn that assuming the wealthy version of you is not pretending, but rehearsing a new emotional and mental atmosphere that eventually becomes your lived experience. This is the moment it turns. You'll understand that wealth is not a result, but a state, and stepping into that state is the true cause of change. This is where illusion fades. You'll realize that every limitation you've accepted was built from old stories, outdated identities, and inherited beliefs that never belonged to you. This is the turning point. You'll see how choosing a new inner character subtly shifts your actions, your tone, your choices, and the opportunities you attract. This is where the path widens. You begin to recognize how wealthy identity shows up not in spending, but in clarity, calmness, and empowered decisions. This is where you rise. You'll feel the difference between someone who hopes for wealth and someone who assumes wealth, just like athletes assume victory long before they reach the finish line. This is where the foundation forms. You'll discover how wealthy identity rewrites your relationship with money, turning fear into familiarity and hesitation into direction. This is where courage awakens. You'll understand why wealthy people trust themselves more than they trust circumstances, and how you can embody the same grounded certainty. This is where patterns shift. You'll uncover why every wealthy identity begins with an inner I am that precedes the outer experience. This is where clarity sharpens. You'll see how aligning your self-concept with abundance naturally closes the door on lack-based decisions. This is where the future calls. You'll recognize that the wealthy version of you already exists and is waiting to be stepped into, like a role that perfectly fits once you dare to wear it. This is where the inner voice changes. You'll hear yourself speaking with authority instead of doubt, much like people who shifted from paycheck to paycheck, living into entrepreneurial confidence. This is where the chains fall. You'll feel how shedding the identity of struggle removes the invisible weight that has held you back for years. This is where alignment takes over. You'll notice how the wealthy version of you makes different micro-decisions, calmer, clearer, more strategic, and how these accumulate into big results. This is where momentum begins. You'll understand that identity change is not an event, but a daily rehearsal that becomes effortless with repetition. This is where transformation locks in. You'll see that once you become the wealthy version of you internally, life adjusts externally to match the shift. This is where your new story starts. You finally realize that assuming the wealthy version of you is not about acting rich, but becoming the person who wealth naturally chooses. Can you imagine understanding the emotional atmosphere that wealthy people carry long before the money shows up, and realizing that in this video, you will learn how to build the same inner landscape so wealth feels natural instead of distant as you move deeper into this story. This is where the feeling begins. You discover that wealth is not first a number but a vibration shaped by your dominant emotional patterns. This is where understanding deepens. You see that wealthy identity often starts with emotions like calm certainty, grounded expectation, and quiet confidence, even when circumstances have not changed yet. This is where the hidden truth emerges. You learn that many people stay stuck financially because they keep returning to emotional states that contradict the life they want to create. This is where clarity unfolds. You realize that feeling wealthy does not mean pretending, but practicing the emotions that align with abundance. This is where real examples speak. You notice how someone working a modest job shifted from panic to poise by intentionally choosing a wealth-based emotional tone, which later opened unexpected promotions and business opportunities. This is where the mind softens. You start recognizing how wealthy people rarely operate from desperation, but from deliberate emotional steadiness. This is where the shift ignites. You understand that cultivating emotional wealth is like tuning an instrument until it plays the right frequency. This is where the contrast sharpens. You become aware of how old feelings of fear and scarcity pull you into old cycles even when your intentions are strong. This is where a new rhythm appears. You begin sensing how emotions shape decisions, and decisions shape income pathways. This is where empowerment lands. You see that choosing emotional stability is the first step toward attracting stable financial outcomes. This is where perspective transforms. You recognize that wealthy identity is not about constant positivity, but about emotional authority. This is where discipline meets softness. You understand how wealthy individuals redirect emotional spirals quickly, treating emotional mastery as a daily habit. This is where confidence breathes. You start feeling how embodying emotional wealth creates an internal environment where higher-level opportunities feel normal. This is where resistance weakens. You realize that as you master your emotional tone, you stop chasing money and instead begin drawing it. This is where alignment strengthens. You sense a deeper truth that emotions communicate to the subconscious what role you are choosing to play in life. This is where possibility expands. You see yourself stepping into the emotional signature of someone who manages, receives, and multiplies money with ease. This is where the groundwork settles. You understand that real financial transformation begins with shifting the atmosphere within you. This is where momentum continues. You notice how each emotionally aligned moment rewires the patterns that once held you back. This is where the next level calls. You feel ready to embody emotional wealth, not just occasionally, but consistently, knowing it is the foundation for the wealthy version of you. Now consider this. How does the wealthy version of you behave when no one is watching? And why does mastering these quiet, unseen behaviors create the biggest financial shifts in this video? You will discover the subtle habits, micro-decisions, and internal standards that silently separate wealthy identities from struggling ones, giving you a blueprint you can apply immediately. This is where the unseen comes to light as you realize that wealthy identity is formed not by dramatic gestures, but by consistent private patterns. This is where the truth deepens as you understand that wealthy people often make calm, strategic choices long before money validates those choices. This is where the ordinary becomes powerful, because you start noticing how simple routines like reviewing finances weekly or speaking to yourself with authority reshape your money trajectory. This is where an example grounds the lesson through the story of a woman who shifted from chaotic spending to intentional wealth building simply by elevating the standards she held when she was alone. This is where the contrast sharpens as you see how people who remain stuck often behave differently in private than the person they claim to become. This is where consistency transforms, because wealthy identity thrives on repeatable actions that strengthen inner certainty. This is where discipline meets identity, when you recognize that wealthy people treat time, attention, and emotional energy like valuable currency. This is where subtlety becomes a superpower, as you realize that the wealthy version of you doesn't panic scroll through problems, but approaches them with grounded clarity. This is where self-respect grows because you begin making decisions based on the future you, instead of the fearful you. This is where alignment tightens as each private choice becomes a vote for the identity you are stepping into. This is where example meets evidence through the story of a man who transformed his finances by changing how he spoke about opportunities, even when none had shown up yet. This is where the inner atmosphere shifts as you begin carrying yourself with the same composure wealthy people embody naturally. This is where the patterns evolve, because wealthy identity demands behaviors that affirm abundance instead of protecting struggle. This is where new standards rise when you choose clarity over confusion and intention over impulse. This is where transformation accelerates as tiny habits compound into undeniable results. This is where confidence grows silently because identity is reinforced every time you choose the behavior of the wealthy version of you. This is where the future stabilizes as you start acting like the person who expects wealth instead of hoping for it. This is where momentum anchors itself in your daily life until wealthy behavior becomes second nature. This is where the next revelation prepares you for even deeper identity shifts that strengthen your path toward abundance. Suppose you discover that assuming the wealthy version of you is less about isolated moments of inspiration and more about creating a daily atmosphere that silently shapes your decisions, your confidence, and your financial destiny. And in this video, you will learn how to build that atmosphere so wealth becomes a natural expression rather than a distant wish. This is where the concept expands as you realize that wealthy individuals carry a consistent internal climate that influences everything they touch. This is where the pattern reveals itself when you notice how they remain steady even on days filled with setbacks, because their atmosphere is not reactive but intentional. This is where the real-life examples speak, such as the man who began treating his mornings as sacred time and watched his clarity grow into profitable opportunities. This is where the contrast sharpens as you recognize how chaotic internal environments create chaotic financial outcomes. This is where the shift becomes tangible because you understand that your atmosphere sends a signal to life about what experiences you are prepared to hold. This is where the emotional field widens as you begin observing wealthy identity not as a persona but as a frequency you maintain throughout your day. This is where self-awareness rises when you start noticing the moments you slip into lack-based reactions. This is where emotional steadiness roots itself as you choose calmness over urgency and expectation over doubt. This is where deliberate energy management shapes your identity, because wealthy people protect their mental space with the same seriousness they protect their investments. This is where clarity takes over when you realize that cultivating a wealthy atmosphere influences how you walk, speak, think, and respond. This is where transformation begins quietly as small internal shifts start producing external evidence. This is where your perspective deepens because you notice how wealthy people treat every day as preparation for more. This is where intention meets embodiment when you commit to holding a stable internal climate even when circumstances test you. This is where the example of the woman who shifted from stress-driven mornings to calm preparation demonstrates how atmosphere rewires outcomes. This is where inner alignment strengthens, because your atmosphere becomes a declaration of who you have chosen to be. This is where identity anchors itself in your body, language, pace, and tone. This is where the wealthy version of you becomes familiar instead of imaginary. This is where momentum grows because the more consistent your atmosphere becomes, the more consistent your results will be. This is where the invitation opens for you to hold this wealthy atmosphere as your new normal, preparing you for the deeper shifts ahead. Envision a world where the wealthy version of you no longer repeats the stories that once limited your income, your confidence, or your sense of possibility. And in this video, you will understand exactly how rewriting these inner narratives frees you from the identity that kept you earning less than your potential. This is where the inner narrative cracks open, as you notice how often your past experiences have been shaping your financial ceiling. This is where the truth becomes undeniable, because you realize that every time you say things like, "money is hard," or "I always struggle," you are reinforcing an identity that cannot align with wealth. This is where real-life examples shine through. The story of a man who grew up hearing that wealth was only for the lucky and unconsciously lived that script until he intentionally rewrote the beliefs he inherited. This is where the layers peel back, as you see how many of your money stories were borrowed from parents, teachers, and society without ever being questioned. This is where clarity rises, when you understand that wealthy individuals refuse to let outdated narratives dictate their future. This is where empowerment returns, as you begin identifying the statements that quietly sabotage your progress. This is where the shift becomes personal, because you recognize that the wealthy version of you speaks from expectation instead of limitation. This is where perspective transforms, as you begin catching the moments your language contradicts the future you want. This is where the power of awareness takes center stage, because noticing the old story is the first step to dissolving it. This is where alignment strengthens, when you choose to tell stories that match the identity you are stepping into. This is where example meets transformation, through the woman who replaced "I never have enough" with "I always find a way," leading her into unexpected opportunities and financial breakthroughs. This is where responsibility becomes liberation, as you acknowledge that you are the author of the narrative you carry forward. This is where identity upgrades, as your new story becomes rooted in self-belief, possibility, and inner authority. This is where your subconscious begins to shift because your story tells it what to expect next. This is where emotional energy stabilizes, since stories aligned with wealth naturally generate confidence and direction. This is where the old limitations lose their grip, as you stop repeating the narratives that once justified struggle. This is where momentum speeds up, the moment you choose to speak as the wealthy version of you. This is where your new story becomes a declaration of your new identity. This is where the path ahead widens, because a rewritten story creates space for a rewritten life. Think of the moment when you finally understand that the wealthy version of you is built through decisions, not circumstances. And in this video, you will learn how powerful, precise choices made consistently can pull you out of your old financial patterns and place you directly on the path of abundance. This is where the truth sharpens, as you see that wealthy people are not defined by luck, but by the quality of choices they make, long before success shows up. This is where the pattern becomes clear, because every wealthy identity is supported by decisions rooted in clarity instead of fear. This is where real-life evidence speaks through the story of a young man who stopped chasing quick wins and began making strategic, patient decisions that transformed his income within a year. This is where emotional maturity anchors itself, as you recognize how the wealthy version of you refuses to make choices from panic or desperation. This is where the shift becomes practical, when you start evaluating each decision through the lens of the future you want, rather than the past you are leaving behind. This is where the subtle difference reveals itself, as you realize that wealthy identity prioritizes long-term gain over short-lived comfort. This is where intention becomes a strategy, because the wealthy version of you doesn't act randomly, but chooses deliberately. This is where the inner discipline rises, as you understand that every small decision compounds into a powerful financial trajectory. This is where alignment intensifies, when you stop choosing what matches your current bank balance and start choosing what matches your future self. This is where a woman's example proves the point, as she declined unnecessary purchases, invested in her skills, and shifted her life within months. This is where clarity becomes a compass, guiding you toward choices that reflect dignity, confidence, and wealth. This is where resistance fades, because each aligned decision strengthens the identity you are becoming. This is where awareness becomes your advantage, as you begin noticing which choices drain your future and which ones build it. This is where confidence expands, when you start trusting your decisions instead of second-guessing them. This is where identity hardens into form, because repetition of empowered choices becomes your new normal. This is where momentum accelerates, as aligned decisions open doors you could not see before. This is where you realize that wealthy identity is engineered, not inherited. This is where your life begins changing, because your choices begin matching the wealthy version of you. This is where the invitation appears, for you to decide at every step as the person you are becoming, rather than the person you once were. Think of the moment when you finally understand that the wealthy version of you is shaped through decisions rather than circumstances. And in this video, you will learn how deliberate choices made consistently have the power to lift you out of old financial patterns and place you on a path defined by clarity, progress, and increasing abundance. This is where the truth becomes unmistakable, as you notice that people who embody wealth act from intention long before results arrive. This is where the pattern reveals itself, when you observe how wealthy individuals choose direction over distraction and strategy over impulse. This is where real-life evidence becomes undeniable, through the example of a young man who shifted from scattered efforts to disciplined, long-term decisions that elevated his income within a year. This is where emotional steadiness takes shape, as you recognize that the wealthy version of you does not choose from anxiety, but from assurance. This is where the shift turns practical, when you begin evaluating each decision according to the future you desire, rather than the limitations of your present moment. This is where a subtle distinction transforms everything. Because wealthy identity is built on choices that prioritize long-term advantage over temporary comfort. This is where intention develops into a method, as you realize that choosing with purpose gradually restructures your entire financial reality. This is where inner discipline gains strength when you understand that every small decision is a building block in the architecture of your wealthy self. This is where alignment sharpens as you stop acting according to your current bank balance and begin acting according to the identity you are stepping into. This is where a powerful example emerges in the woman who redirected impulsive habits into structured investments and watched her life evolve. This is where clarity becomes a guide that directs you toward decisions grounded in dignity, confidence, and foresight. This is where resistance dissolves because each aligned decision reinforces your new identity. This is where awareness becomes your greatest advantage as you begin seeing which choices support your future and which ones weaken it. This is where confidence expands naturally because decisive action strengthens trust in your own ability. This is where identity becomes solid as repetition turns wealthy behavior into instinct. This is where momentum accelerates as aligned decisions open pathways previously invisible to you. This is where the truth settles in that wealthy identity is created through consistent choice, not inherited circumstance. This is where your transformation becomes visible as the decisions you make begin reflecting the wealthy version of you with increasing precision. This is where the journey continues as you step forward choosing not from who you were, but from who you are becoming. Ask yourself what happens when you raise your standards to match the wealthy version of you, and in this video, you will discover how higher standards reshape your self-image, your opportunities, and the quality of experiences you begin attracting into your life. This is where the shift becomes undeniable, as you realize that standards act as invisible boundaries that determine what you accept and what you rise above. This is where the contrast deepens, when you observe how individuals with a wealthy identity hold themselves to expectations that elevate every area of their lives. This is where real-life examples bring clarity, such as the story of a woman who transformed her outcomes simply by refusing to entertain chaos, excuses, or self-sabotaging habits. This is where understanding sharpens, as you see that your standards quietly teach others how to treat you and teach life what to deliver to you. This is where identity strengthens when you begin choosing behaviors that align with excellence, rather than mediocrity. This is where the power of standards becomes clear because wealthy individuals do not hope for better outcomes. They require them through consistent, elevated action. This is where your self-perception evolves when you stop tolerating patterns that belong to an older version of you. This is where emotional alignment grows, as higher standards naturally create more stability, confidence, and control. This is where momentum begins, as elevated standards influence how you speak, how you think, and how you make decisions. This is where discipline becomes natural, because once you raise your standards, lowering them becomes uncomfortable. This is where opportunity expands, since higher standards draw higher quality relationships, choices, and financial openings. This is where clarity intensifies when you realize that standards are not restrictions, but declarations of your worth. This is where internal authority strengthens, because choosing higher standards means choosing yourself on a deeper level. This is where alignment deepens, as every elevated expectation reinforces the identity of the wealthy version of you. This is where transformation accelerates, when your environment, habits, and mindset rise to meet your new standards. This is where old limitations fall away, because they cannot survive in an upgraded internal world. This is where confidence becomes steady as you witness how quickly life responds to your new expectations. This is where your wealthy identity takes shape through the standards you choose to embody. This is where the door opens to the next level of your transformation, as you begin living from the expectations of the person you are becoming, rather than the person you once were. Consider the possibility that every wealthy outcome you desire can first be lived in your imagination. And in this video, you will learn how mental rehearsal transforms abstract desires into concrete experiences, teaching your mind and body to align with the wealthy version of you before any external evidence appears. This is where the practice begins, as you realize that imagining yourself acting, speaking, and deciding like your wealthy self programs the subconscious to respond accordingly. This is where the method becomes clear, because consistent visualization trains not only belief but expectation, making opportunities and resources flow naturally. This is where real-life examples inspire you through the story of an entrepreneur who rehearsed winning negotiations daily, resulting in contracts that seemed impossible until his mind was prepared. This is where precision matters, as you understand that mental rehearsal requires emotional engagement. The feelings you embody while imagining are the real drivers of change. This is where alignment grows, because the wealthy version of you already exists in a consistent mental space long before it manifests externally. This is where resistance fades as imagination replaces doubt, making clarity and confidence habitual. This is where repetition anchors transformation, embedding patterns that direct attention, focus, and action toward abundance. This is where identity deepens, when you consistently see yourself as capable, resourceful, and prosperous in your inner world. This is where opportunity appears, because your mind begins to notice and attract circumstances aligned with your rehearsed identity. This is where awareness expands, as you recognize how the imagination precedes reality and shapes every decision, emotion, and interaction. This is where focus strengthens, because rehearsing wealthy outcomes clarifies priorities and eliminates unnecessary distractions. This is where emotional resonance rises, as you cultivate the feelings of satisfaction, ease, and confidence that naturally accompany wealth. This is where momentum grows, linking visualization with deliberate action and creating seamless forward movement. This is where subtle shifts become powerful, turning imagined possibilities into lived experiences. This is where empowerment settles, as you gain control over your internal environment, ensuring that external circumstances are interpreted through the lens of abundance. This is where transformation anchors itself through consistent mental practice, building unshakable confidence in your own capabilities. This is where clarity illuminates paths that were invisible before, opening doors only your rehearsed identity can walk through. This is where your wealthy self becomes familiar and natural, as each mental rehearsal strengthens the foundation of reality. This is where preparation meets destiny, equipping you to act from the identity you are choosing rather than the life you are leaving behind. Picture for a moment how the daily actions of the wealthy version of you create an invisible architecture that supports every success. And in this video, you will learn exactly which habits, when consistently applied, elevate your identity, your productivity, and your ability to attract opportunities that align with abundance. This is where the foundation begins, as you realize that wealthy people structure their days with intention, prioritizing activities that reinforce growth rather than drain energy. This is where clarity sharpens, as you see that habits are not merely routines but expressions of identity that shape the life you inhabit. This is where real-life examples illuminate the path, such as the story of an individual who adopted reading, focused planning, and disciplined saving each morning, gradually transforming financial outcomes that had seemed unreachable. This is where alignment grows, when you recognize that each small, consistent habit compounds into long-term results that define your trajectory. This is where awareness deepens, because observing your own habits reveals which patterns serve your wealthy self and which keep you tethered to struggle. This is where emotional reinforcement occurs, as positive routines generate confidence, stability, and a sense of capability. This is where momentum builds, as daily repetition trains the mind and body to respond automatically in ways that support abundance. This is where focus becomes natural, when your environment and actions consistently reflect the standards of the wealthy version of you. This is where resistance dissolves, because ingrained habits gradually replace limiting behaviors with empowering ones. This is where identity consolidates as repeated actions solidify the beliefs, values, and expectations of a prosperous self. This is where opportunity aligns itself with consistent practice, revealing doors previously unnoticed or inaccessible. This is where confidence strengthens because executing aligned habits reinforces the certainty that you are capable of achieving more. This is where subtle adjustments become powerful, as fine-tuning routines produces disproportionate outcomes. This is where control expands as you master the triggers, cues, and sequences that create productive flow. This is where transformation accelerates when the habits you cultivate create a self-perpetuating cycle of abundance and growth. This is where consistency proves decisive, as repetition becomes the scaffold on which your wealth identity is built. This is where your new standard emerges, reflecting the actions and decisions of someone who embodies prosperity naturally. This is where internal authority grows, as your habits communicate to yourself and to life the identity you are choosing. This is where the stage is set for the next level of your transformation, preparing you to expand both your vision and your reality as the wealthy version of you. Ask yourself what happens when every word you speak, even silently to yourself, reinforces the wealthy version of you. And in this video, you will discover how mastering your internal and external language rewires your identity, elevates your confidence, and magnetizes opportunities that reflect abundance naturally. This is where awareness begins, as you recognize that the way you describe yourself, your circumstances, and your potential either constrains or expands your reality. This is where the truth becomes clear, because wealthy individuals use language that aligns with possibility, certainty, and capability, shaping outcomes before action is taken. This is where real-life examples illustrate transformation through the story of a man who shifted from phrases of limitation such as "I can't afford this" to empowering declarations like "I always find the resources I need," unlocking financial opportunities he had never imagined. This is where alignment deepens, as you notice how habitual speech patterns reinforce either struggle or success, silently instructing your subconscious on what to expect. This is where emotional resonance strengthens when language begins to evoke confidence, clarity, and expectation rather than doubt or hesitation. This is where subtle patterns emerge as every thought, conversation, and inner dialogue compounds to create the energetic signature of your identity. This is where discipline anchors transformation because consistent use of wealth-oriented language rewires habitual thinking into automatic affirmation of abundance. This is where momentum builds as verbal expression begins to influence action, decision-making, and the quality of relationships you attract. This is where clarity sharpens because speaking as the wealthy version of you immediately changes perception and opportunity. This is where internal authority grows as your words communicate your self-worth to yourself and the world. This is where resistance fades because language now supports rather than undermines your vision. This is where focus intensifies as conscious communication filters out distraction and misalignment. This is where confidence becomes steady when repeated speech patterns reinforce your competence and potential. This is where identity solidifies, because the words you choose become inseparable from the person you are becoming. This is where influence expands, because articulating wealth-oriented language affects how others respond to you. This is where consistency proves decisive, as regular reinforcement establishes a permanent shift in mindset and expectation. This is where subtle cues align behavior with intention, ensuring that your actions and words are coherent reflections of your wealthy self. This is where transformation locks in, as language becomes a natural extension of identity, seamlessly attracting wealth. This is where the next stage of your journey is prepared, inviting you to embody the wealthy self fully in thought, word, and deed. Picture for a moment how the spaces you inhabit, the people you surround yourself with, and the energy you allow into your life either amplify or diminish the wealthy version of you. And in this video, you will learn how to consciously design your environment so it supports abundance, productivity, and the identity you are stepping into. This is where awareness takes root, as you realize that wealth is not only an internal state, but is reflected in the external cues, habits, and influences around you. This is where the contrast becomes clear, because environments that reinforce lack keep talented, capable people trapped in patterns of limitation. This is where real-life examples illuminate the principle through the story of an entrepreneur who reorganized his home, office, and social circles to reflect clarity, efficiency, and opportunity, which accelerated his business growth beyond expectation. This is where subtlety gains power, because small adjustments in surroundings, cleaning, organization, and intentional aesthetics signal to the subconscious that wealth is already present. This is where alignment strengthens, as you see how wealthy people carefully curate their associations, distancing themselves from negativity and drawing closer to mentorship, inspiration, and growth. This is where momentum begins when your environment mirrors the identity you are embodying, creating a feedback loop that supports daily action. This is where emotional stability grows because spaces and relationships that reinforce abundance reduce stress, indecision, and distraction. This is where decision-making improves as external cues subtly guide you toward productivity, focus, and high-value opportunities. This is where discipline becomes effortless as habits naturally align with the expectations of your environment. This is where clarity sharpens when you recognize that your surroundings influence energy, mood, and motivation far more than you previously realized. This is where identity anchors itself, as consistent external reinforcement helps internalize the wealthy self. This is where opportunity surfaces because environments aligned with abundance attract possibilities and connections that might otherwise remain invisible. This is where confidence deepens as you observe how carefully curated settings cultivate pride, professionalism, and self-respect. This is where repetition locks in transformation, because daily exposure to supportive conditions habituates success-oriented behavior. This is where old limitations dissolve as environmental cues no longer validate scarcity or compromise. This is where influence expands as you naturally gravitate toward people and spaces that reflect higher standards and vision. This is where the energetic field of wealth becomes tangible, creating momentum that carries through decisions, actions, and relationships. This is where your identity and environment converge, reinforcing each other and magnifying results. This is where preparation for greater levels of abundance is completed, positioning you to step fully into the wealthy version of yourself. Now consider this: how the wealthy version of you perceives and manages time completely transforms the results you produce. And in this video, you will learn how to treat every moment as a resource, prioritize high-value activities, and structure your days so that time works in your favor rather than against you. This is where awareness deepens as you recognize that the way most people spend their hours reflects their identity more than their intentions. This is where contrast becomes clear, because individuals who consistently act from a wealthy mindset allocate time strategically rather than reactively. This is where real-life examples illustrate the power of this principle through the story of a young professional who began scheduling his day around income-generating tasks, skill building, and intentional rest, producing results that exceeded his prior expectations. This is where the mindset shift anchors itself, as you understand that every minute carries value, and how you use it determines the trajectory of your financial life. This is where alignment grows because the wealthy version of you prioritizes activities that compound rather than expend energy. This is where momentum accelerates when daily choices begin reflecting deliberate allocation of attention toward growth and opportunity. This is where focus sharpens as distractions are removed and high-impact actions become habitual. This is where emotional control strengthens because treating time as valuable reduces stress, procrastination, and reactive behavior. This is where decision-making improves as scheduling and prioritization create clarity around what truly matters. This is where identity reinforces itself, because every choice in how time is spent signals the level of self-respect and vision you hold. This is where opportunity emerges naturally as structured, intentional time management opens space for connections, projects, and ideas that align with your wealth identity. This is where repetition builds unshakable habits that support long-term financial growth. This is where the invisible architecture of success is established, as every day becomes a building block toward your goals. This is where clarity magnifies, because a disciplined approach to time exposes what is valuable and what is unnecessary. This is where momentum compounds as cumulative effects of strategic time use create breakthroughs previously unimaginable. This is where consistency proves decisive, because wealth is a reflection of disciplined actions over time. This is where confidence expands as you experience control over results through intentional timing. This is where your internal and external worlds align, as daily structure mirrors the identity of the wealthy version of you. This is where the next layer of your transformation is unlocked, preparing you to treat every moment as an instrument of abundance. Envision a world where the people you interact with daily directly influence your ability to embody the wealthy version of you. And in this video, you will learn how to cultivate relationships, surround yourself with high-caliber individuals, and leverage networks that amplify your opportunities, mindset, and growth. This is where awareness begins, as you realize that who you spend time with shapes your thinking, habits, and identity far more than circumstances or effort alone. This is where the contrast becomes clear, because people who maintain wealth-oriented mindsets consistently associate with others who reflect ambition, resourcefulness, and vision. This is where real-life examples illustrate transformation through the story of an entrepreneur who intentionally shifted his social circle from casual acquaintances to mentors, peers, and collaborators who modeled success, resulting in partnerships and projects that accelerated his financial growth. This is where alignment grows, because the wealthy version of you recognizes the energy and influence embedded in every interaction. This is where momentum takes hold, when networking becomes not a chore, but a strategic approach to reinforcing your identity and expanding possibilities. This is where emotional calibration strengthens, as surrounding yourself with positive, driven, and like-minded people fosters confidence, courage, and clarity. This is where awareness sharpens, as you notice relationships that drain, distract, or reinforce scarcity, prompting intentional separation. This is where action becomes deliberate, because seeking high-value connections requires both strategy and discernment. This is where patterns evolve, as each new relationship reflects the standards, expectations, and behaviors of the wealthy self. This is where opportunity appears when exposure to growth-minded individuals introduces knowledge, collaborations, and insights previously inaccessible. This is where consistency reinforces identity, because repeated engagement with the right network shapes thought, decision-making, and behavior. This is where trust develops, as relationships provide guidance, support, and accountability aligned with your wealth trajectory. This is where momentum compounds as networks amplify your reach, credibility, and influence. This is where clarity expands when you observe how wealthy individuals cultivate influence without forcing outcomes, relying instead on authentic, mutually beneficial engagement. This is where discipline anchors transformation, as deliberate association replaces passive social habits. This is where identity solidifies, because the people you consistently engage with reflect and reinforce the wealthy version of you. This is where the energy of your network becomes a catalyst for growth, opportunities, and increased confidence. This is where the next stage of your transformation is prepared, positioning you to leverage human capital as a natural extension of your wealth identity. This is where the invisible architecture of influence converges with your personal strategy, establishing a foundation for sustainable abundance. Suppose you discover that the wealthy version of you thinks differently in ways that magnetize opportunities, resources, and breakthroughs. And in this video, you will learn how to cultivate a mindset that naturally draws abundance, allowing possibilities to appear with ease and timing that aligns with your identity. This is where awareness sharpens, as you recognize that mindset precedes action, and the internal environment you maintain shapes the external reality you experience. This is where clarity emerges, because individuals who embody wealth consistently focus on solutions, possibilities, and growth, rather than limitations, complaints, or excuses. This is where real-life examples illuminate the principle through the story of a professional who reframed challenges as opportunities, leading to unexpected promotions, partnerships, and investments that multiplied his income. This is where alignment deepens as you notice that thinking like the wealthy version of you involves combining optimism with strategic action and practical insight. This is where emotional reinforcement grows, because a mindset oriented toward abundance produces confidence, courage, and resilience in the face of setbacks. This is where subtle patterns become powerful, as repeated focus on opportunities strengthens neural pathways that make recognition of advantage automatic. This is where momentum builds when mindset and action synchronize, creating a cycle where thoughts guide behavior and results reinforce belief. This is where discipline anchors transformation, because intentional mental focus over time rewires default thinking from scarcity to expectation. This is where identity solidifies as habitual thought patterns align with the persona of someone who expects, receives, and multiplies wealth. This is where opportunity becomes visible because your mind begins noticing connections, resources, and timing that previously went unnoticed. This is where emotional equilibrium strengthens as a solution-focused mindset reduces stress, fear, and indecision. This is where clarity magnifies, because every choice is filtered through perspective, possibility, and strategic reasoning. This is where influence expands as confident, abundant thinking inspires and impacts others. This is where repetition compounds transformation, embedding the patterns that define a prosperous identity. This is where subtle cues align perception with reality, ensuring that opportunities are consistently recognized and leveraged. This is where internal authority grows as the wealthy mindset reinforces trust in your judgment and capability. This is where energy concentrates on creation rather than distraction, multiplying results exponentially. This is where the path forward opens effortlessly, reflecting the alignment between thought, identity, and opportunity. This is where the stage is set for the next level of embodiment, equipping you to think, act, and attract as the wealthy version of you in every moment. Can you imagine believing in your wealthy self so completely that doubt no longer influences your decisions or your results? And in this video, you will learn how cultivating unwavering faith in your identity and capabilities transforms uncertainty into action, hesitation into clarity, and potential into tangible results. This is where awareness begins, as you realize that faith is not blind hope, but a confident expectation rooted in deliberate mental and emotional alignment. This is where clarity emerges, because wealthy individuals act with certainty, even when external evidence has not yet manifested, knowing their inner conviction precedes outer proof. This is where real-life examples illustrate transformation through the story of an investor who trusted his intuition and rehearsed outcomes in his mind long before contracts were signed, resulting in opportunities that exceeded logical expectation. This is where alignment strengthens as you notice that faith in yourself creates the emotional and mental environment necessary for results to follow naturally. This is where momentum builds, because consistent belief in your own capacity removes hesitation, fosters decisive action, and draws resources effortlessly. This is where subtle patterns reveal themselves as daily reinforcement of confidence, expectation, and inner certainty rewires the subconscious to act in alignment with wealth. This is where emotional resilience grows, because faith stabilizes responses to challenges, setbacks, or external uncertainty. This is where clarity of purpose sharpens, as belief in your identity dictates your choices, priorities, and actions. This is where alignment anchors transformation, because your inner world consistently communicates readiness, authority, and expectation to life itself. This is where trust in timing strengthens, as faith allows you to navigate delays or obstacles without reverting to old scarcity thinking. This is where internal authority consolidates, because faith validates your actions, reducing the need for external validation. This is where opportunity multiplies, as the confidence and certainty you embody attract people, resources, and situations that match your expectations. This is where repetition compounds transformation, because each demonstration of faith reinforces the neural patterns that define a wealthy identity. This is where subtle influence grows, as belief naturally inspires and aligns others to your vision. This is where momentum accelerates, as every act, word, and decision is filtered through a lens of expectation rather than doubt. This is where consistency solidifies identity, as faith becomes automatic, habitual, and unwavering. This is where courage expands because conviction in your future overrides fear in the present. This is where the wealthy version of you becomes familiar, natural, and unavoidable. This is where the stage is prepared for deeper embodiment, inviting you to act, think, and feel as your wealthy self in every sphere of life. Envision a world where the wealthy version of you is not a concept, but a lived reality. And in this video, you will learn how to translate identity into tangible action, ensuring that every decision, behavior, and choice consistently reflects the abundance, confidence, and authority of your future self. This is where clarity emerges, as you recognize that wealth is not only imagined or felt, but demonstrated through aligned, decisive action. This is where patterns become visible because wealthy individuals act as if their desired outcomes are inevitable, moving with intention even when the path is not fully mapped. This is where real-life examples inspire through the story of an entrepreneur who embodied his future self daily, from negotiations to planning, resulting in business growth that surpassed expectations. This is where alignment deepens because action without identity lacks power, while identity without action remains theoretical. This is where momentum grows as repeated actions aligned with your wealthy self create a compounding effect, attracting resources, opportunities, and recognition. This is where subtlety proves crucial because even small actions, when consistent, communicate to the subconscious and to life that you operate from abundance. This is where emotional steadiness strengthens, as taking deliberate action reduces fear, procrastination, and self-doubt. This is where decision-making clarifies, because actions taken from identity are inherently confident and strategic. This is where internal authority rises as consistent performance reinforces self-trust and capability. This is where influence expands because others recognize the competence, consistency, and alignment of your behavior. This is where awareness sharpens as you learn to notice which actions truly serve your future self and which are distractions. This is where discipline anchors transformation, ensuring that your actions are habitual rather than random. This is where momentum compounds as aligned action produces results that reinforce identity, which then drives further action. This is where clarity intensifies as feedback from experience validates your chosen path. This is where opportunity accelerates because proactive behavior positions you to receive and capitalize on what aligns with your wealth identity. This is where repetition solidifies skill, competence, and presence, making abundance a natural extension of your life. This is where subtle influence grows, as embodiment inspires confidence, trust, and alignment in others. This is where the wealthy version of you becomes tangible, integrated, and undeniable. This is where your transformation advances, preparing you to consistently act, think, and feel as the person who naturally attracts wealth and abundance in every sphere of life. Ask yourself what it feels like to fully inhabit the wealthy version of you in every thought, action, and emotion. And in this video, you will learn how to integrate all the principles of identity, habits, mindset, standards, networks, and influence into a seamless expression of abundance that naturally attracts opportunities, resources, and fulfillment. This is where awareness crystallizes, as you see that wealth is not a goal to chase but a state to live, and living it consistently shapes every aspect of your reality. This is where clarity sharpens, because the wealthy version of you makes decisions, sets standards, and acts from alignment rather than reaction. This is where real-life examples illuminate transformation through the story of an individual who embodied every principle: mental rehearsal, emotional frequency, disciplined habits, and strategic networks, resulting in accelerated financial growth, influence, and personal fulfillment. This is where alignment deepens as thought, word, and action converge into a coherent, powerful expression of identity. This is where momentum compounds because every layer of practice reinforces another, creating exponential growth in both internal and external results. This is where subtle patterns reveal themselves as consistency in small actions produces outsized outcomes, reflecting mastery of self. This is where emotional resonance strengthens, as confidence, gratitude, and certainty become the default state rather than a temporary experience. This is where decision-making becomes instinctive, because alignment with identity dictates choices effortlessly and strategically. This is where internal authority solidifies as repeated practice cements trust in your capabilities and intuition. This is where influence magnifies because the embodiment of wealth naturally attracts collaboration, respect, and opportunity. This is where awareness expands as you perceive how every action, word, and thought either reinforces or diminishes your identity, prompting continuous refinement. This is where momentum grows as daily alignment integrates mental, emotional, and practical elements into a unified approach to life. This is where subtle cues, habits, and decisions compound, producing a ripple effect of abundance that touches all areas of experience. This is where confidence becomes unshakable because identity, vision, and action are in complete coherence. This is where opportunity aligns effortlessly with readiness, reflecting the magnetism of your fully embodied self. This is where discipline anchors transformation, as living the wealthy version of you becomes habitual, automatic, and sustainable. This is where clarity becomes your guide, navigating challenges and choices with certainty and focus. This is where the energetic, emotional, and practical layers of wealth converge, creating a seamless, unstoppable trajectory. This is where the journey culminates in full embodiment, where the wealthy version of you is no longer imagined, but lived, experienced, and reflected in every facet of life.